Okay. I would like to call the May 30th Committee of the Whole meeting to order, and we are honored to gather on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. First item is approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second, all in favor?
Don't we have late items?
Those are
That's for
on
this
the other,
evening.
They're in?
next
Okay.
one. Delegation.
Next meeting.
That the Committee of the Whole received the delegation of Maurice Primrose from BC Assessment,
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Good afternoon, Maurice.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Cumberland via Zoom.
Thank you.
Technology is great sometimes.
Okay, there we go. Start my video. There we go. Can everyone see me okay and hear me
Yes.
okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll begin. Let's see here. Can you let me know? Can you see the title screen with your village logo on it?
Yes.
Yes, we can see the screen, Maurice.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'll begin if that's okay. Good afternoon, and thank you to the Village of Cumberland for having me to meet with you today. BC Assessment's Nanaimo office is located on the traditional territories of the Sunemu Nation of the Coast Salish people. And I'd like to thank Michelle Mason as well and the village once again for inviting me out today. A little bit about me. I've been Deputy Assessor for about 6 years in the Vancouver Island region and 17 years with BC Assessment in total. I'm a graduate from the UBC Sauder School of Business and a member in good standing of the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. My portfolio on Vancouver Island includes all residential properties non-strata and farms and Indigenous communities on Vancouver Island. So without further ado, we'll go into the presentation. So a little bit of an agenda or topics of what we're going to discuss today, a bit about valuation, classification, the assessment cycle, relationship between assessment and taxes, and then I'm going to speak very specifically to residential and Class 7, which is managed forest, on the request of the Village of Cumberland. So who we are, what we do, and how we do it. For those of you who don't know, BC Assessment provides an annual list of property values identifying ownership, value, and classification exemptions for each property in BC. Over 2.1 million folios totaling over $2.4 trillion in taxable value, providing about an $8.3 billion annually in property taxes for local governments and communities. So one of the things that needs to be known about how we do what we do and why we do it is market value as of July 1st. So market value, as you can read on the screen, is the most probable price in which a property would bring in a competitive market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale, buyer, seller being prudent, and price not affected in any way by undue stimulus. So that in definition is our arm's length transaction. And we use these to value residential properties primarily throughout the year. For commercial properties, we do the same thing. For legislated properties such as utilities, farms, and managed forest, we turn to rates prescribed by cabinet each year to set the values for these particular types of properties. So why do we use a fair market value to value our properties? It's internationally recognized as the fairest system of distribution of the property tax burden, as properties with similar values pay similar taxes. And what does that mean to you? It means that values fluctuate annually based on what's happening in the market. And every year is a new year where we report out value on the assessment roll, depending on the market. So this is quite an important slide for local governments, is to understand how we classify properties, because then we take the distribution of value and we put it into one of these 9 categories. So you then in turn can assign your tax rates. Of course, Class 1, which is the biggest property class in most local governments around BC, is residential, and that's land or improvements or both that are used for residential purposes. The list is quite extensive. This is driven directly from the prescribed property class regulation in the BC laws. Class 2, land or improvements held for business and transportation by pipeline, telecommunication, electrical cable, utilities, supportive housing. This would be things like Vancouver Island Mental Health Society, the Kool-Aid Society. To be in Class 3, it must be approved by Cabinet, whereby there's an appendices to the prescribed property class regulation where we can put specific roll numbered properties, $1 on the land, $1 on the improvements. Major industry, port lands, hydro dams, power producers, etc. Light industry, gathering pipelines for extracting, processing, manufacturing, transportation of goods. I'm going to skip Class 6 for now. Class 7 is managed forest land that are registered within the province, like Western Forest Products. Recreation, not-for-profit, can be a whole host of things, anything from golf, skiing, tennis, ball games of any kind, lawn bowling, public swimming pools, archery, ice skating, etc. Farmland, land and improvements that are support farm use and classification that meet the test of income for applying for farm status each year. Now I skipped over Class 6. Class 6 is your business and what we call others. So it's all your commercial properties that include land and improvements not included in Class 1 through 5 or 7 through 9. So there are some unique properties that fit into this category, and Class 6 is we kind of deem it as a catch-all, but it's primarily for any other property class and commercial that is not described in the other regulation. Important to look at our annual assessment roll and key dates. So this January 1st to 31st is the inquiry period. As of course, if you know, assessment notices go out on January 1st each year, and the public has an opportunity to call and inquire to BC Assessment about their property assessments. January 31st is the appeal deadline. So then to be heard at the Property Assessment Review Panel, you got to have your appeal filed by then. We just finished not too long ago, February 1st to March 31st, all of the hearings through the Property Assessment Review Panel. And right now we're right in the middle of the Property Assessment Appeal Board. So this is a formal level of appeal where people can argue their property assessments on a written formal basis, usually predicated by an appeal management conference between the board and BC Assessment and a property owner. So we're right in the middle of that right now. The appraisers are working on AMCs and briefs to support our values. July 1st, of course, is our valuation date, where we look to market every year to give us a guiding light as to where we need to be moving assessments each year for each of the 9 different property classes. And then after the summer wraps up, we turn our attention to roll production. So this is the annual production of the assessment roll. So starting in September, we will start preparing the 2023 assessment roll. October 31st is physical condition and permitted use. So what was the state and condition of a property per se as of October the 31st and its permitted use? That will delineate its property class. Ownership reflects LTSA records. So any ownership that is processed through land titles by November 30th will be reflected on the roll. December 31st, assessment notices produced and mailed. And then December 31st, those noted on the assessment roll are liable for the taxation. And then we start the whole process all over again. So this is an important graphic that we provide on our assessment notices, one of 2 as a matter of fact. So it's speaking to the relationship between assessments and taxation. So BC Assessment functions independently of taxing authorities, but does not set property tax rates. That is a very clear line in the sand. An individual's property assessment determines their share of the property taxes for the property class they fall within. BC Assessment's function is to ensure the property tax burden is distributed equally among similarly situated taxpayers. So the assessed value times the property tax rate equals property taxes payable. The next graphic kind of talks about it a little bit further. When you see that, if my assessment went up 20%, I can't afford my taxes to go up to 20%. So this is a conversation we carry throughout the entire year, with property owners. If everyone in Class 1, say, goes up 20%, and you've changed the same as everybody else, then your taxes likely do not really change if you're within that average. If you were lower than that average change, then your taxes may likely be less than the group of class 1. If you're higher than the average of 20%, say, then your taxes will likely increase. This is the most important factor is not how much an assessed value has changed, because this is argued every year at appeal at the Property Assessment Review Panel and the Property Assessment Appeal Board, arguing percentage change. And the boards will not see that as an argument, as a valid argument. But it's more as to how much the assessed value has changed relative to the average change for the property class that falls within the municipality or taxing jurisdiction. And this assumes that local governments don't really make any drastic changes to their annual budget year. And then this infographic makes quite a bit of sense. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the Village of Cumberland on a couple of matters. First, I'm going to speak high level provincial. We're going to drill down to the Comox Valley, and then we're going to look into Cumberland so you can kind of see how what's happened in Cumberland correlates to what's happened elsewhere on the island and elsewhere in the province. Okay, so we'll start with the first slide, which speaks to the province itself. The total value of the assessment roll has increased by 22% from 2021 to a total value of $2.44 trillion in taxable value. Non-market change has increased by 53% or $33.9 billion over the previous year. I'll go into non-market change on a more in-depth slide coming up, so I can define that better for you. And then the total value of the residential portfolio provincially, and it is the biggest slice of the pie for all the 9 property classes in BC. It was up 88% this last year to $1.89 trillion. So you can see it makes up the bulk of the total roll at $2.44 trillion. So it's the biggest portfolio that we carry. The number of properties increased by 1.2% this last year to just over 2.142 million. If we look to the Comox Valley Regional District, we've seen an increase in the number of properties increase marginally for 2021 to 34,620 properties. An increase in total assessment roll year over year, 22%, very healthy increase over 2021 to a tune of $25.27 billion in taxable value. And then non-market change was up 15% from the 2021 roll at $4.328 billion. There was a minor increase in folio count year over year, a very healthy increase in overall roll totals. Previously it was 20.68 billion, now it's 25 billion. The NMC was in step with the province at about, provincially it was about 12.41%, and the Comox Valley saw about 15%. Now, when we look at the Village of Cumberland, so we've had some pretty substantive increases in the residential property class, 38% in residential this year, single family that is, 28% in strata, and about 18.5% in commercial. Last year, the increase in residential single family was 6%, strata was 6%, IC&I was 1%, and non-market change was 19.5 million. In folio growth over the last couple of years, it's been pretty minor. In 2020, there were 1,812 folios in Cumberland, 1,862 in 2021, and 1,869 in 2022. For the 2022 roll, Class 1 residential made up 92% of the roll total for Cumberland. That's 1.19 billion out of a total 1.29 billion. NMC for Class 1 was 27.51 million, offset by, and you look at that, if you look at 27.51 million, you think, well, why does it say on the screen 27.02? And that was from the negative non-market change out of Class 7. I'm going to get into the Class 7 piece in just a couple slides, but first I want to talk about non-market change. So non-market change is the change to your annual assessment roll not driven by market activity. So the annual assessment roll changes in 2 ways, through market change and non-market change. Market change is a result of demand and supply for a real estate commodity, which I think is pretty straightforward. Not every property class nor subsector of the same class changes exactly the same. The market for commercial property changes differently than residential properties. Similar waterfront residential properties move differently than non-waterfront or strata residential, etc. So local governments like to look at non-market changes, extra gravy on top of the market movement of a community. So this includes all your new housing that wasn't on the roll the year before. Demolitions will take away from will negatively impact your non-market. Subdivisions will increase your non-market change because you're creating new fee simple lots that can be sold individually. Zoning changes can have a huge impact. Boundary extensions, property class changes have a very big impact. And any exemptions that might be done through a permissive tax exemption, of course, will also change your non-market. Okay. So I just want to talk a bit about what's happened in the single family dwelling market and managed forest for Cumberland. So looking at the overall market, there's some pretty interesting facts that came through very clearly this year when we came to set the 2022 assessment roll. Demand was incredibly heavy across Vancouver Island. Overbidding was very, very common this last year. There was a 75% increase in single family dwelling sales volume across Vancouver Island. I know this because I monitor it daily during roll production to figure out what we're using to set the annual assessment roll. We typically gone around 8,000 sales a year to set the entire residential portfolio on Vancouver Island. But last year we had over 14,000 sales, almost a double amount of sales to set the annual assessment roll. So if you think about that just a little bit beyond what that number means, it means it takes more appraiser time to review the sales. It takes more time to determine which are the right sales to use to set a community. And it takes more time to process all the subdivisions that may go with it and all the new construction. So it was a very, very busy year for BC assessment last year to get this 2022 roll closed. And this is the first year that I've seen over 1,000 single family sales over north of Malahat, over $1 million. Absolutely unheard of last year. It was a wild market of activity. And then, Vancouver Island's residential assessments are typically went up 15 to 35%, which was fairly commensurate with the rest of British Columbia. So next slide goes into a little more detail here. So this is the central Vancouver Island area. These lines in red up and down represent, I got a pointer here somewhere. Here we go. These lines here represent July 1st. Our valuation cycle, and then down here you can see here's 2018. I'm sorry, the graph, the font is really small. I've shared this presentation outward so you can see it. 2018, 19, 20, and 21. Here's 1. So here's an assessment to sales ratio of 1, which is what we strive for 0.98%, and this is 1. You can see how the trend over the last few years of the assessed value to sales ratio, how it's continually grown on Vancouver Island. And this would, in this here, where you see, would represent the 14,000 sales that we used as data to set the 2022 roll. So you can see the increases that we've had across the island. Well, Central Vancouver Island makes up part of those 14,000 sales, but you get the idea, rising anywhere from 10, 20, 30, 40, and even 50% of value to set the roll. Now, if we move to Cumberland, this is what we're seeing currently. Here's July 1st, 2022, and here's the sales that I'm seeing coming through right now. Here's your 1 baseline right here. So what I'm already seeing in the market, and this is only July 1st, we still have another 3 to 4 months on the other side of July to go in terms of sales, and we look at everything that's happened in the marketplace. We're still seeing some increases here, 10, 20 to 30%. So SFD sales volumes have remained steady into the 2022 calendar year for the 2023 roll. For the Village of Cumberland, there's been roughly 30 sales so far this year. Q2 sales are still showing increases. And I cross-checked our data against the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board graph stats. Comox Valley SFDs, April 21 over April 22, are up about 27% year over year right now in terms of value. The median sale price is roughly $875,000. So it's been a very telling and trying year on Vancouver Island for property owners, for buyers, for sellers, for us to set an accurate and stabilized assessment roll. Now I want to move into something very specific, managed forest. And this was at the request of council that I kind of speak to this a little bit. So when I polled, I had conversations with Michelle, and when we spoke, we saw that there was a negative non-market change impact. So the extra value added to the roll not related to market of negative $635,000 this last year in Class 7 managed forest. So that's pretty interesting numbers. Not being my bailiwick, I was rather curious to dig in, and I was able to uncover some answers that will hopefully help with this question. So managed forest is a bit of an interesting beast. BC assessment determines the value of land without trees. So that's our starting base. So we look at what is the raw terra firma worth, and we take in topography and other issues that may be a part of the land. And then we turn to the prescribed rates for managed forest, Class 7, set by cabinet, and we apply those rates with uniformity across the province. So those rates take in all sorts of things like topography and soil. They take in different types of timber. There's a whole book of rates that are applied and that is used for every managed forest property across British Columbia. Then, after the trees are harvested, BC assessment will add the value of the timber to the value of the land, but it's kind of done in a bit of a unique way. So when harvesting is reported from 2 years prior, it is only reflected to the assessment roll once, and then it is gone. So, for example, 3 years ago in 2019, there was quite a bit of timber harvesting reported and reflected on the 2021 assessment roll. Now, for the 2022 roll, it was only counted once in 2021, so you can only count it once and then you remove it from the roll. So there was a lot of forest activity in 2019 that was reported in 2021, and now for 2022, only counting it once, it was removed. Hence the minus $635,000 non-market change. And what is really interesting, it goes further, when you look at forest companies like Timber West or Comox Timber, here's how it's described. So let's use Timber West because it's a very well-known forest company on Vancouver Island. Their managed forest portfolio contains folios everywhere from Souk to Shirley to the Cowichan Valley, the Comox Valley, and North Island. So when we go to value them each year, so we'll take the aggregate of all the sales and add them to the roll, or we'll take and then the following year we'll take that aggregate of sales and remove it from the roll. What's interesting is that addition or that subtraction from the assessment roll is done on a consistent level and proportionately to the folio size of all the folios within the portfolio. So you might say, well, how does that work? So if there's say they have folios in your community, in your taxing jurisdiction, they could have nothing happen on that folio for 3, 4, 5 years, but there can be a lot of activity happening on the other folios in other parts of the island, which will negatively or positively impact the value of those Class 7 folios within your taxing jurisdiction. It's a bit of an odd one to understand, but that's how it works. And that's all I really had for today for this presentation. Of course, you know, we have a very robust website at bcassessment.ca. I invite all of you to take 5 minutes and search through it. There's everything from assessment search tools for value, property information trends, FAQ pages for managed forest, farmland, and other property types, First Nations, et cetera, in BC and how we value them. We have a YouTube channel with lots of great information and data advice and assessment link for our local government customers. But I just learned today that assessment link is now deactivated. We have now engaged in a brand new database to manage our assessment portfolio beginning with the 2023 roll. So very exciting times for us at BC Assessment. And that's all I had for today. I was told to keep it short and sweet, so hopefully I met that test and answered some questions that might have been out there. But if there's any questions that council would like to present, I'll do my best to try to answer them now, if you like.
Thank you very much, Maurice. What I would like to do is go around the table and ask each council member if they have questions. So, Councillor Kettler.
Sure. Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. Yeah, so I guess starting with Cumberland's property assessments, they've obviously been increasing significantly over the last few years. I know that you were saying that you probably get a lot of disputes saying that the property taxes will be increasing by the same amount as the assessment, which isn't true. You talked about how it actually is about the average in the community. But it does affect, when Cumberland's property values go up significantly, it does affect how we are taxed through the regional district. You know, the higher assessments, we ended up taking a bigger chunk of the taxes from the regional district for the services that we participate in. So there is a negative effect there. I was also wondering about how many disputes that you have got or complaints from Cumberland residents over the last few years. Are they proportionate to the levels of increase that we've seen?
So thank you for that question. I'll start with the first part of your question. So under the Assessment Act, we are mandated to examine the sales, as I was talking about. And last year we had over 14,000 sales that showed us where our market needs to move to. I'm going to speak to just class 1 here for ease of purpose. You know, we have to report 98% of the sale value on the assessment roll every year. So that's in the Act, and that's one of our standards of conduct and or measures that we use when we set the annual assessment roll, and it's audited very thoroughly every year in all regions and jurisdictions to make sure that we're hitting about 98% of market value for the annual assessment roll. The disputes and complaints, yes, I would agree. We had quite a few more this year than average. You know, assessed values across Vancouver Island rose between 15 and 35%. Some areas rose even more than that, 60 and 70%. But we didn't move forward with those increases without a reasonable volume of sales to show that this is what the market is willing to pay. So if you think back, or maybe you know, maybe you don't know, about 2 years ago, we started seeing some increases on Vancouver Island. My first community to step to the plate and said, what is going on, was the village of Tassis. And I met with Mark Tatchell, and we went over his assessment roll, and I showed him all the sales and what they'd actually traded for in an open market, and how that meant translating through to an increase in everyone's residential values for his community. What we saw this year is a catch-up of the rest of Vancouver Island move towards higher values. You know, I've grown up on Vancouver Island my whole life, and the island has changed dramatically. Having grown up in Parksville and lived in Nanaimo for the last 15 years, I've really seen an uptake on interest in the North Island. North Island communities have really developed their community services. The markets in Victoria and Vancouver have pushed people literally from Vancouver to Victoria, and now they're moving up island. There's with the advent of telework, you know, you can work from anywhere now, and with the what's it called, the Coast Link Direct, you're going to have high-speed fiber optic internet anywhere on North Vancouver Island, and people can work from any community. having visited to Cumberland, a very beautiful community, I love going to the brewery and getting their muffalata. You know, it's a very enticing and inviting community. It's almost like a Whistler of Vancouver Island. You got the recreation of the mountains and the lakes, and it's a very desirable community and place to be, and a bedroom community for places like Courtenay and Comox. So we've seen, you know, even in the smaller communities like Port Alice, we've seen 30 to 40% increases over this last year. People are looking to affordability, and people are looking to new places to raise their families that aren't cost prohibitive. But I do think with, you know, the Bank of Canada raising rates recently, and the conversation they're going to raise them once again, is I've seen it in the sales. We're starting to see homes stay in the market a little bit longer. We're starting to see a slowdown in the overbidding or over ask for properties, and the antics of writing letters and begging, please take my money, you know, to buy a property. We're seeing a slowdown in a lot of that. I do keep in regular touch with realtors, so I kind of have a bit of an idea of the pulse of what's going on, and those are some of the things that we're kind of seeing. So to summarize, we do report out by the act what's happened in the market. And I'll get you the dispute complaints year over year, maybe for the last 3 or 4 years for Cumberland, and I'll share that. I'll send them to Michelle, and then you can have a look at those. I don't have them at my fingertips right now.
Thanks. Can I also ask a question about the managed forest, just to help with my understanding? When they have a decrease, the part of Class 7 that's set by cabinet,
Yes.
are they looking at timber loss to forest fires, timber changing hands to First Nations communities, and other situations like that, and then basically posting a loss in that category, which would then result in lower taxes to local governments?
That's a good question. I'm going to find that out for you. What I know now, like I said, just having stepped into managed forest for the purpose of this meeting, is that it's solely based on the value sold. But that's not to say it couldn't be, you know, maybe sold at a fair price. I remember my conversation with my colleague that there's a very strict reporting scheme for reporting the lumber produced. It's all based on type of wood, fir, cedar, whatever the case may be, and quantity and quality. So let me find out about that. I can dig into that a little bit further, and I'll also send those back to Michelle for distribution amongst council.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Councillor
you
Brown?
bet.
Thank you. That was really informative. My question is also around the managed forest. So and I'm trying to wrap my head around it as well, as you probably are as well. So the in the beginning of your slide on managed forest, you mentioned that it's just the land that is valued. So
Yes.
so
That's
what?
our starting point.
Okay, and then the timber is added, but that takes 2 years to come into effect?
Yes, so we look at the land first, the size, the topography. The size comes into play in terms of valuation. The topography and other influences, maybe there's a big water course on it, or steep slope, or, you know, the poor soil quality. So then we just value it as raw land. We only value the timber once it's harvested. So that land can sit there for years with no activity. That land value will likely stay the same unless cabinet changes those land rates. But the moment somebody pulls that timber off, let's say they harvest it in 2020 year, then it gets reported to BC assessment the end of that 2020, the January 1st of the following year, 2021. And then we reflect it once on the 2022 roll. And then for the 2023 roll, you'll see that value added product of timber removed for the 2023 roll. So that drops your NMC. So you'll see a spike in some managed forest properties based on their timber harvest within the collective of all the folios that they have within that forest unit, I guess you could call it. It's like farm units. You can have multiple folios within a farm unit. You can have multiple folios across Vancouver Island that are part of a managed forest portfolio. So any changes, so they might harvest in Souk, they might harvest in North Cowichan, but they're not harvesting anywhere else. That value added timber that was harvested elsewhere will be added in 2 years to the, say, 2022 roll, but then it'll disappear for the 2023 roll. It's only counted once, that value of the harvested timber.
Okay, and so I'm jumping ahead to how we might advocate for a change to those the rates set by the province. Is there information on the website around that, or around those rates and how they have fluctuated over the years, or would you have access to that in some way?
They're not posted publicly, but we could access those. They're not hidden, but we don't publish them on our website. One of the offers that my colleague has made for managed forest, if you want to have a separate meeting and discuss these really pointed questions, she'd be more than happy to sit with you and go through it, if that would help.
I think that would be very helpful. And then my other question is also on the managed forest. So is there a difference between publicly owned land and privately owned land?
In terms of
The rates.
Rates, no. But there is, to be applicable to those rates, there's quite a regimen that you have to go through to apply for managed forest. So if you say you own 50 acres and you privately own it, you can't get managed forest class 7 unless you go through a strict application process through the province of British Columbia, through the Ministry of Forests. Only then can you get class 7.
Right, but once you're in, you're good.
Yes.
And on private land, it's often the case that that's just waiting to be, sold for development. So, yeah, that's my concern. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Sproul?
Well, a lot of my questions have been answered already, but I wondered if, because it went so fast, if you could just give me the percentage for the 3 municipalities in the Comox Valley, the percentage increases with the, oh, wait a minute, we already said Cumberland.
Yeah, I'll just draw from my immediate package from January. Courtney residential, make sure I got the right year here. Yeah, went up 35%. Comox 35%. Cumberland 38%. And just for information's sakes, Campbell River 34%. Port Hardy 39%. Port Alice 35%. Port McNeil 43%. Gold River 39%. Tassus 29%. They had one of the lowest increases in the North Island because we saw substantive increases on the 2021 roll. Alert Bay 39%, Sayward 27%, Port Hardy 39%. So pretty much north of 30% almost everywhere in the North Island. Most near 35 to 40% this last year.
Thanks. But, with Cumberland having surprisingly high the $1 million Camp Road houses and stuff, that surely skews a lot of your data, because you wouldn't expect to have so many houses like that one road. So many. Yeah, they really are. Old coal miners' cottages from 120 years ago bringing $1 million. I thought that would really skew the what's happening in Cumberland.
Yeah, so when I was speaking to class 1, or when I was speaking to market movement within a prescribed property class, so we break out residential dwellings in different ways and value them independently based on the sales that have happened within that little subset. So if you have brand new construction, we have a code number for it that we call it new construction built in a certain year. And we look at the sales in that have that same coding. And then we look to those sales to tell us where we need to move the value of that one particular group of properties. The same with mobile homes. We keep those exclusive of single family dwellings. We look at what those did within in a park. Same with strata properties, residential. We'll look at what's happened in that market separately from the single family dwelling, from the SFDs. Acreages are separate from single family dwellings. So we split everything out. We look at the sales that happen in that grouping. So then we treat that one grouping the same. And that bodes for us in a favorable way, because when it comes to defend the value, we can extrapolate sales out of that exact grouping that we use to say this is why your new value is this. So we do try to split them out where we can. And so the old miners' cabins, those would be valued independently. The land would be, set based on land in that particular immediate area. And then the improvements would be valued based on the sales to get us a total assessed value. Different from, say, the brand new houses that are being built. So they're totally separated when it comes to valuation.
Okay. We need to move along because we've got a full agenda. So Councillor Sullivan?
Thanks, Maurice. Yeah, I'm not sure if I kind of had some similar questions, just specifically with what you're saying in the last question. On my personal home that I'm renting went up 46%, and I'm not really familiar with any direct new construction or anything within anywhere near where I live. So just as per your last answer, just as a regular human being, I don't understand why my personal home I live went up 46%. Okay, that's not a question. That is just my reality. I had a question about the market value of July 1st, price not being affected by undue stimulus. I'm not sure if I'm getting, I have a question about the undue
So in an arm's length transaction, so something undue stimulus, it could be duress or something like that to influence the sale price. So what our appraisers do is they go through a whole checklist of, was it MLS exposed? Was there a knowledgeable buyer and a willing seller in an open market without undue duress? That's where that comes from. So pressure to sell a property, an issue or a negative influence on the sale price of a property. So if we see a really hot market, but we see a new house selling for really low, we start getting curious and we dig in. Is this a sale that we can use to set our market? Typically, we find that it's an outlier because maybe it was sold, father to son in a contracting agreement, or there are other pressures that maybe come out. Maybe it was a multi-sale. Maybe it was a sale of 5 or 6 homes in one deal. So we look at, so duress is one of the things that influence. I'm just trying to think of other examples off the top of my head, but primarily it's duress. Pressure to sell in a marketplace. That's where that comes from.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you very much, Maurice. I look forward to having you back again, and I'll ask my questions then because we are on a time limit here. So thank you very much. Look forward to having you again. A lot of very good, useful information, and we really appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Next time I'll try to come in person, but reach out to me anytime through Michelle or through our Vancouver.island at bcassessment.ca, and I'll be happy to help you out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Next, reports that the committee received the Recreation, Arts and Culture Plan interim report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So this is a check-in for Council to provide an update on the project to date, which has included completing some background inventory research as well as a first round of engagement with multiple different groups, including residents, several stakeholder organizations, as well as in parallel to all that, we've initiated kind of a custom process to involve the Comox First Nation in this. And to date, that's been proven to be a great opportunity for us to really work with their community and through their staff and council on incorporating their interests in the realm of recreation, arts, and culture. So I'm going to pass this over to Adam and Gabby from HCMA, and Gabby is their sub-consultant from GDH. Can't remember the acronym, doesn't matter. And they can present to you folks on an update on the project.
Thank you, Kevin. I am just trying to get this to the proper mode. Just a second.
Yeah.
Presentation mode.
Looks
Kevin,
great.
can you confirm that that's working?
That looks awesome. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, thanks. So thank you for having us. My name's Adam Fox with HCMA in Victoria. And with me is Gabi Haas from GDH Solutions, and she's in Kelowna. And together we are going to give you a presentation that summarizes the report that we provided, and just to give you an update on the project that we're working on with Kevin and his team. Oh, there we go. Project timeline. So we started this work in January. First reviewing all the reports that we could find on the facilities that you have and the offerings, the programs that you offer. We also visited the site in around, I think it was very beginning of February, to walk through the village, walk to the three parks, Village Park, Village Square, and number 6 Mine Park, and then also the cultural center and the recreation center. Also was able to have a tour of the museum. So we're able to walk through all those facilities and parks and really get a better sense of the community and the facilities that you have. Then since then, through the spring, has been really a lot of work by Gabby, and so she's going to do a lot of the talking today related to engagement. So we worked together to create questions for a survey that was hosted on SurveyMonkey from the village. You hosted it, and then we received the data. And then also at the same time, Gabby conducted a number of interviews with different stakeholders, and both on Zoom. Mostly, I think all of that work was on Zoom. And then we also hosted an open house in the cultural center. And then we've wrapped that up into a report. And so here we are in May, checking in with you, with council. Just to check in, this is what we heard, this is what we observed on site, and what we've read, and we just want to make sure that we, in your mind, that we got it right, that we spoke to all the right parties, and that there aren't any holes in the work or any surprises, positive or negative. We can. Just a way of checking in with you. Did we get it right? And then, because the next stage is going to be developing the 10-year plan for recreation, arts, and culture for the village of Cumberland. So there's just some background where the facilities that we saw, the cultural center, the rec center. As I said, it was early February. I think it was February 1st. Kevin's daughter's birthday, I seem to recall. Still some snow on the mountains. I'll hand it over to Gabby.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. Adam covered this slide pretty well, that we undertook engagement through a number of different processes. I met with 35 plus key community stakeholders. And this included the nonprofit societies, the school district, CVRD, recreation, the Downtown Business Association, a whole bunch of like nonprofit groups like the Arts and Culture Society. Met with a number of sport organizations that primarily use Village Park, as well as the community center. And I also met with the village staff, both full and part-time. So, Adam, are you advancing these? Yes, thank you. So this is just a visual of the in-person engagement. It was kind of a fun, unique way of trying to engage some more community people. And as you can see, people are drawing and, writing up stickies, and all of that information was gathered. And the information from that is also in the report, the written report that we provided. So here's as a result of the survey, the interviews, and the community event, we developed, out of the information we received, themes. We decided that it would be useful to lump the information into, we came up initially with 9 different key themes. Next slide. So we had 9 themes, and trouble is I can't read the slide numbers on here, but that's okay. So the first area we called foundational, and this included the importance of First Nations and accessibility and inclusivity. And then we moved along and we realized that it wasn't on our initial list, but when our group met and went over these foundational themes, we realized that we needed to add climate change and fiscal responsibility. So the next heading for a key theme area was setting the context. And there was 2 key areas. One, of course, and this is what was talked about your former deputant, the rapidly growing and changing community. And that brings lots of new people with potentially different expectations. And it also influences, the other people who are already living in the village. They start feeling that their facilities are being overused, partly in response to the new residents and that kind of thing. So that's another piece that needs to be considered. The second contextual theme was the role and impact of arts and culture on the future of Cumberland. Cumberland has a long history of arts and culture. Events is part of that. We'll be talking about that in a minute. And of course, it has a big impact. Arts and culture has a big impact on economic development for the community. Okay. So under another theme was the provision of services. And of course, in this plan, the main areas of service delivery are recreation, arts and culture, programs and activities through the village, and also through partnerships and collaboration. So while many of the recreation, arts and culture services are provided by the village, just as many, if not more, are provided by other organizations and societies. And that includes even the school district, the Community Schools Association, and all the various, you are all familiar with the arts and culture organizations. And there's a list of all of that in the actual document. Okay, where are we here? So I think it's over to you, Adam.
No, there you go. One more.
One
more.
Great. Okay. So yes, another key piece. I feel the service delivery is a key piece, and of course, events is a key piece, and another really important piece is the infrastructure. And so we have a theme at this point called infrastructure, which is about the aging and insufficient physical infrastructure. And that's, primarily the recreation center and the cultural center. And then also included that are some of the buildings, in the parks. And again, I'll jump over to the village outdoor spaces. So Village Park, the infrastructure there is also aged and insufficient. And so that's something that needs to be looked at. And then, just the role of all of that infrastructure or lack of infrastructure also impacts outdoor activities. I think, and now you're to the left. Yeah, this is back to you, Adam.
Sure. So this is really just organized in a different format, but really the same information. And so again, those key themes under the foundational relationships with the Comox First Nation, accessibility and inclusion, climate change, and fiscal responsibility. So these are ideas that are necessary to infiltrate all areas, all themes as we go through, and then setting the context. Again, the growing and changing community, arts and culture and events. Under services, the service delivery, and the partnerships and collaboration that you have, and then where, well, as the architects part of the team, where we'll be looking at is the aging infrastructure and both the buildings and the parks and the recreation, so the village outdoor spaces, as well as the aging infrastructure. So this is at this point in the project, this is what we've heard, and we've taken that work of what we've heard, all the meetings that Gabby's had, and the public open house, and we've distilled it down to these sort of four different categories.
We're definitely open to other thoughts on this in terms of categories or what we might have missed as a key theme, throughout this process.
So I'm not sure the format of this meeting, but that's our presentation. So we're open for questions or comments.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Councillor Brown.
I thank you. Thanks so much for the report. I'm wondering if you have a list of you note that you made contact with 35 different groups or something. I didn't notice a list in the report.
I definitely have a list. And Kevin, I'm not sure if you have that, but I can certainly send it to you.
Yeah, that can be provided. I don't think we didn't want to specifically tie. There's a lot of overlap amongst the feedback, so we tried to summarize some of the information in the report, but that information can be provided.
Okay, awesome. Just so we can see whether we missed anything. So a couple of things. The survey seemed very recreation heavy to me, so which is indicative of the heavy recreation use in our village, but also the challenge, I think, of identifying from the general community what specific arts and culture activities or programs they would be looking for. So I think there might be a bit of a gap there that I don't want to miss. Also, there are venues that are not owned by the village that are really important to that sector as well. The Masonic Hall, Weird Church, hopefully the Ilo in the future. And I think the knowledge around those venues is also important data to be collected. I know it's in private hands, but they are regularly used for arts and culture events. So how do we capture those, because that identifies a need? How are we capturing that? And then there was, at the open house, conversation about a black box, which, as I understand, is a space that could be used for multiple different things, and I don't see that identified in the report. So I wanted to flag that. And I think, and then the other concern I had, I know this was not trail specific, but the Cumberland Forest Park is not just used for its trails, it's used for all this other programming. So did we collect that somehow so we know, so that's also feeding into this, even though it's not about trails, if you know what I mean?
I can address some of those. So although, starting with the latter question, although the focus has been on the core downtown parks that see the most kind of intensive recreation or cultural special event use, we have considered other ones. And so that has included the community forest, and particularly Lake Park as well. And the idea here is we have other planning processes for those parks, but we can't disregard them in this. But we really don't want to be redundant in planning, but we also want to make sure that we find opportunities to incorporate them where it fits into this plan. As for some of the specifics on infrastructure, both in the private or in not-for-profit realm versus village, I think they're addressed through services and infrastructure, and that's where we're going to do a deeper dive through plan development. And so it was very well understood by the project team that there are some deficiencies in our ability to offer some of the arts and culture programming that we think the community is demanding through the engagement, or not demanding, requesting, with lack of infrastructure right now. So that's going to be part of our challenge is, what are the options in responding to that? And the same with the, when we talk about infrastructure, it's kind of that balance between service delivery that the municipality does versus that's being done by a third party. And that's where we thought, well, partnerships and collaboration, we really need to tease out, well, how do we figure out how we can better support, and what are the synergies between some of these organizations that the village may informally work with now, but there might be an opportunity to do more for the betterment of the community. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sproul?
I really like all the details and lists of things that people are suggesting we need. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm glad to see it all, including from swimming pool to arts and cultural type. It's quite a mishmash. The new roof did not fix the leaks, so that stuff that it's a bit disturbing that we need. There's a lot of things. It gives us a clear guide in where we need to put energy, and it seems that a performance space for art and culture is important, and the village park has so many things that it is deficient in, like field house, etc. But this is a beginning of a list of things that we can work. I guess the idea is to triage this list now. So thank you for all the information.
Councillor Sullivan?
Hey, thanks for this, guys. I really like the custom First Nations engagement piece. That was very great to see. The key themes are also really succinct and thorough, especially with the additions of the climate change and fiscal responsibility. I don't really see any gaps there. I thought that was well done, and I like the format. Obviously, the survey shows a lot of demand for outdoor event infrastructure, which we've just recently talked about, including covered spaces for bandstands and performances and improved facilities, as Councillor Sproul just mentioned. I think we all know we're desperately in need of more public washrooms in that part of town, and the park could use lots of improvements. The partnership section, you had mentioned that the museum would benefit from a closer relationship, which surprised me. So I would like some elaboration on that. Just I thought that the village and the museum were pretty close. So a question about that. Maybe I have a couple more points. The renaming of the cultural center I thought was kind of funny because it's true, nobody does get it. Nobody knows where it is, what it's called. And I've lived here for a really long time, and it's still the same thing. So a rebranding of that would definitely probably help everybody, and that's a good call. And to reiterate more of what the councillors have said about maintaining, like, recreation is very well represented in our community, and some comments that I personally received from people who were at the open house were that they would just really like to maintain more of a focus, or as much focus on arts and culture as we can. We don't have an arts and culture policy yet. Recreation has been very well prescribed in our village, so this is a really good time to beef up our arts and culture portions of the village. At the same time, it's being included with recreation, but I just want to not lose sight of the fact that we've given a lot to the recreation sector in our village, and we need to make up a little bit more for the arts and culture sector. And section. Thank you. Thanks for your report very much. Cheers.
Okay, Councillor Kettler. Oh, sorry.
Wait, I did have that question about the museum.
Yes, you did.
Gabby, would you like to start responding with that one? You would have one that did the interview with Roz.
Yeah, it was just, just trying to remember exactly what. So she appreciates the partnership and the work that's being done between the museum and the village. Maybe that just came out, negative, but it really wasn't like that at all. It was just the desire to continue to work together moving forward. And there was also interest in, of course, whatever decisions are made in terms of a new or updated or whatever it is, recreation facility and cultural, whatever, that the museum continue to have a role in that and to be part of that. Because, it's a great facility. We toured it. We really enjoyed it. And we felt that there's a lot of promise moving forward. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but I don't think that there's an issue there. It's just, it was a desire to continue, to be involved.
That sounds great. Which it reads a little bit less.
And maybe
Yeah,
if I can just
okay.
add to that, like the village formally only has a lease agreement with the museum. So it's, simply about providing a facility. It doesn't talk about any additional kind of opportunities for programming or events or how we're going to work together on those types of things. So we have a number of, park use permits or event rental agreements on one-off type things, but not bigger picture. And I've only spoke very kind of preliminary with Roz, and I think staff and council, there's great relationships, but there is an opportunity to potentially build more, and that's captured in, partnerships and collaboration. There's a number of those organizations in the community too. So.
Great, thanks. That's perfect. Thanks.
Councillor Kettler.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a lot of good ideas in here, and thanks to the community for doing the survey and putting out all those great ideas. I think we want to use this to help us with our future planning, and so I kind of think about how we need to tie it into other plans, transportation being one, how we're going to direct people, active transportation as well. And for the art side, it just seemed a bit lacking in terms of, we did state that it's important with economic development, but we didn't really do, too much of a dive into how that might be developed and how that could guide our decisions moving forward. So, I'd like to see a little bit more on that. Also including sort of our new tourism direction with the region, and I guess again going back to like partnerships with the museum, the tours and stuff they do, like bringing all that together so that we can sort of create a clear vision of where we want to go. I know it's early stages, and so that's, this is just reporting back survey results, and we still got a ways to go on the plan. But there's some clear things that we have. We need more washroom facilities and both outdoor and indoor. Some very low-hanging fruit in that regard. But on a broader strategy, I'd like to sort of bring in. Once we have this done, bring in more of those plans and to create a consolidated vision for Cumberland. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you very much. I wasn't surprised at what was put in the report. It's much of what we already knew but it's good to see it in writing and all together. We're certainly lacking in infrastructure for large events, and like everyone has said, this is the beginning process, and it truly is, and you cannot do anything until you actually have a plan. So this is the start of our plan. And I'm really glad to see so many people came out and so many people participated in the survey. It was really nice to hear. And what I like about it is that people that usually don't come out to the meetings will answer a survey. And so we get input from many, many people. And I did talk to a number of the organizations that were really pleased about being part of this process. So thank you very much for doing that. And I look forward to step 2. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
Thanks, Adam and Gabby. See you guys soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Moving on, we have the committee received the Development Approvals Process Modernization Summary Report for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So approximately a year ago, we applied for a provincial grant through the Local Government Development Approvals Program. The village received a grant of approximately $240,000 to review and update our development approvals process, including information technology to support it. We subsequently issued an RFP for this review and update. We contracted with Urban Systems, and Nancy Henderson and her team have been working on this for a few months. Today, we are presenting a summary report with recommendations for process improvements. As we've talked about before, today, the village's development approval process is more suited to a slower pace of development. And I'm very much looking forward to implementing changes to modernize the way we do business. I'll turn it over to Nancy Henderson.
Okay, we have to make a motion. I didn't do that the last time. So that the committee receive a presentation from project consultant Nancy Henderson of Urban Systems.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I would just like to share my screen with you guys. I think you could probably see that now, and I'll just start the slideshow. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I provided a comprehensive report in your package, and I know that you have a limited time this afternoon, so I will whip through this presentation. I may kind of skim over some of the slides fairly quickly, but we can always go back to them should you have any questions. So yes, today I'll provide an overview just of this project, as well as some of the recent changes regarding Bill 26, which I know that your staff have also provided an update to, so I won't take too much time there, but we do have some decision point questions that we'll be looking for feedback from council, so important to kind of touch on that. We'll provide some background and then go over the recommendations and sort of how we've categorized those as we've been undertaking our engagement associated with this process, and then get into the decision point discussion. We'll be asking council some questions for feedback to guide the next phase, and we'll discuss some next steps. So just starting with some background, the provincial government undertook a development application process review in 2019, and there were some findings from that I'd like just to bring to council's attention, because, you know, many times you feel that some of the complaints that you're receiving or things you're hearing about your development process are unique to your municipality, but I think what the province found is that there's quite a lot of similarity across the province, and many municipalities are dealing with incomplete applications and poor quality submissions from applicants, which tends to slow down the process and take a lot of resources from staff. There's a much needed improvement for just web information guidelines and brochures to help people through the process, especially with those that are less familiar with the application process. And that over time, applications have been getting, or the whole process and regulations across the province have been getting much more complex. And especially in smaller municipalities, those complexity and dealing with risk and concerns and covenants and numerous consultants is a lot to deal with, especially when you have a small staff. And sometimes you'll find that there's also different opinions coming from different departments. And ideally, we want to create a process or system where staff is sort of a unified voice back to the applicant. So we've made some recommendations around that as well. And externally, it was also requested, I think, from the development community that they'd like to be able to easily see like where their applications are at in the process, and ideally more consistency across the province between local governments. And this is obviously in the jurisdiction of each municipality, but it would be a lot easier if there was some more uniformity across the system. So Bill 26, and I won't get into too much detail here as I know you received a report from staff, but there's some recent legislation changes that has taken place in November that removes the default requirement to hold public hearings for zoning bylaws or zoning amendments that are consistent with the OCP, as well as the opportunity to delegate development variance permits to staff. And they would be for minor development variance permits, and it would be up to the municipality to determine what minor is and how that was defined. And this is since the village applied successfully for the grant through UBCM. In terms of the background, we've undertaken, phase one of the project, which is sort of providing an external process review and recommendations. It is a phase one of a multi-phase project. The Village of Cumberland received approximately $230,000 from the UBCM to undertake this project, which Urban Systems currently has a contract for about $80,000 of this entire grant at this time. In terms of the phases, as mentioned, we're really been looking at, how things are done now. It's sort of basically a sort of a status quo, what's going on in the system and how could it potentially be improved. And then the next phases are about implementing the recommendations of the report. We had meetings with numerous stakeholders ranging from elected officials to the development community. We've had an online survey that was, fairly well received from the development community. We put many email offers out for interviews to the development industry as well. We only had 2 take us up on that though, but we had a pretty good survey response. And then we came on site and we met with about 14 staff members as well, individually as well as in the workshop, which was really great. Got some really good feedback that helped us put this report together. I mean, staff have a very good understanding and idea of what needs to be done to improve the process, but it's really hard to do off the side of your desk when you're as busy as you are right now. So what we heard some common themes. I mean, there's definitely increased volumes, desire from the development community to have more consistent benchmarks and monitoring. How long is my process going to take? How long does it take to get to this point? And, the village has seen quite a lot of, as a changeover in staff over the last few years. So how can we make it easier to train and onboard new staff? Development permit guidelines came up a fair bit in our conversations, and especially related to accessory dwelling units and the resource implications that has internally. Is seen not only internally, but externally as well. Many bylaws and, the development permit guidelines in the OCP could potentially be updated to help streamline the process. The public information meeting process that the village currently has came up, again, related to DPs, and we've discussed that in the report. But it's an extra step in the process, and that's, being identified by the development community. I think there's more opportunities to delegate to staff, which tends to speed up the process usually by about 4 to 6 weeks, just by not having to come forward to council and rate the council reports and so on. Much additional communication materials, template letters, and I know that staff's been in the process of implementing some of those even during the course of this project since we kicked it off. And then file management, and with the new administrative assistant position or planning assistant position, there's definitely been some improvements there, but that's an area where we could continue to probably make some strides. And as with everywhere else, or most everywhere else in the province, incomplete applications are certainly take quite a bit of resources from staff to sort of chase those outstanding requirements. And we've identified that pre-application meetings, I think, was identified by the development industry as something that they'd like to see more of. And we've seen a lot of success with municipalities that do have those. And I think we identified that only about 46% of applicants that responded to the survey did have pre-application meetings. So what we did is we took everything that we've heard as well as best practices, and we've made a number of recommendations throughout the report. We've identified 5 categories. You see 4 here, including process, communications, policy and regulations, and internal procedures. And then we also have a sort of overarching category as well regarding IT solutions and records management. And how can we leverage underutilized software that the village already owns to make the processes more efficient, and opportunities for templating and tracking that you could do even with like the Office 365 environment. There's many purchase type softwares that you could buy as well to improve development application processes, but they're also very expensive and they take a lot of initiative to launch. So we're looking at how can we improve the IT side of things just by utilizing software that you already have, and there's many opportunities to do so. But this area does need additional analysis and study. We did look, as we went through the recommendations, keeping very close to the grant funding scope with the money that you have received from UBCM, prioritizing the grant funded projects over those that aren't grant funded. So everything that's been identified as short term that matches the funding deadline of the grant, and medium term would be sort of beyond the grant deadline, which is August 2023. And then some things are just ongoing, the procedural implementation. So we've categorized everything. And then, as we get into the next step, it's about, how do we prioritize what can be done within the funding, which is a significant amount of the recommendations. So just I'm not going to go through all of these. They are in your report, but just to give you a flavor of some of the recommendations in terms of process recommendations, looking at those benchmarks so that there's clear targets to try to hit. Another suggestion is maybe having an opportunity to fast track applications using external consultants, and Council may wish to kind of look at those only for certain types of applications, major developments or maybe even affordable housing, but it is something that could be analyzed further. And then we will also talk about the potential to remove that public hearing when zoning amendments do conform to the OCP. And I think using these pre-application meetings is another area where you're going to see a lot of efficiencies when there's very clear expectations as to what's required for a complete application, and sort of tailor it to the specific application so that the person is leaving with a checklist, and when they come back with their application, they would also bring that checklist, because intake of application, there's some opportunities for improvement there as well. In terms of communications, developing application guides and brochures, there is a very high level of desire from the development community for more guides and brochures, and that's something that's certainly grant funded, and I think that there's a lot of efficiencies that can be provided through just frequently providing answers to frequently asked questions and so on. And then in terms of just industry relationships, and we could use, this process and this sort of grant funded process to build relationships with the development community. But just, you've got a lot of new developers coming in, and the more that they understand what's important to the village, generally, the smoother things go during the process. We've also suggested a single point of contact. You have a single file manager system at the village, so that there'd be a planner assigned to the file, which is best practice and recommended, but it's also recommended that the developer have a single point of contact on the application so that it's not the responsibility of staff to make sure the information is getting to the numerous sort of consultants or potentially owners involved, which just takes some of the burden off staff as well. In terms of policy and regulations, one area that we saw was a major burden on staff time was the accessory dwelling units and the requirement for a development permit. So we would, this format using development permits for accessory dwelling units or carriage homes is quite common during sort of carriage homes being allowed as a permitted use within zones, but it's really shifting now for most municipalities, moving away from development permit guidelines and instead having maybe more stringent regulations in the zoning bylaw to cover off that need and take that step out of the process, which would really free up a considerable amount of staff time to focus on other applications. And then, as mentioned, that would also come with zoning bylaw amendments. And we also would, as some of the recommendations were, if they were to be implemented from this report, it would need other bylaw amendments in order to reflect those changes. And that would certainly be an important phase 2 activities. In terms of internal procedures, we've mentioned quite a few already, but even processes around financial tracking and file closeout procedures. So in case of a project doesn't move forward, sometimes when you see those dips in the economy, things don't happen for a while, and you might have a new planner picking it up 2 or 3 years later. With proper file closeout procedures, it can become much more efficient to pick that up again. And, we'd like to identify some opportunities for utilizing automation and IT solutions in terms of file tracking as well, and even sort of monitoring timelines and targets and development application statistics and so on. And then one item that came up across a number of staff was the current street tree requirement and a fairly cumbersome process just collecting the bonding and making sure those get planted, and looking into that and finding efficiencies there is another area which might free up resources for other uses. And then in terms of the IT solutions and records management, there's a lot of opportunities to be posting these guides and brochures that we're talking about on the website, potentially a web portal so that people could be submitting their development applications online, and opportunities for them also to check the status as to where it's at in the process. And then we've got some file management recommendations and just sort of records management in general. And then utilizing, the Share 60 and Microsoft Office 365 to track the process and log communication, and provide some opportunities for automation and templates coming out of that. And there's the village is currently utilizes the CVRD as the GIS provider, and there might be some opportunities to build on that to provide additional information to staff, which would make processing more efficient just by having additional information readily available, and utilizing summaries and dashboards so that when there's reporting to council, this could be automated and easier for staff to pull together should council wish quarterly updates, for example. And the last sort of advocacy component is a little bit outside of the scope of the work in terms of the recommendations and the implementation. However, it might be something that the village would like to consider with UBCM on the horizon, is recommending that the village advocate for expansion of the DCC eligible funding projects to broaden the scope, from infrastructure and parks to include other civic facilities such as fire department equipment or recreation facilities and amenities, which would help implement, the presentation from the previous consultants in terms of implementing amenities needed to accommodate growth in Cumberland. And the province did identify that this was a high priority for their consideration, just in terms of development finance. It also can speed up if the village is looking to negotiate amenities through zoning. If you didn't have to do that because you knew that you could be collecting for these types of amenities through a DCC or similar program, then the village may be more comfortable pre-zoning land to get the type of development that they're looking for, with knowing that they're not giving up an opportunity to negotiate amenities. So it might be something that the village would like to look at with UBCM on the horizon. In terms of the Bill 26, and just kind of coming into the handing it over to you guys, looking for some feedback, but essentially the legislation is now changed. So holding a public hearing for a zoning amendment that's in conformance with the OCP is no longer a requirement. You would have to provide notice. So there's a notice prior to readings of the bylaw. And this would sort of be, in the report, you'll see a flow chart like this. So if a application was consistent with the OCP, there could be a no public hearing stream if it was in conformance. There's still a notice requirement. It would then go to by the first reading to council. And if council felt, you know what, this is really controversial, or we'd like to the public input, then you could essentially say, you know what, we want to do. You could opt in to a public hearing. But if you felt that it was in conformance with the OCP and something you wanted to see, you could just move forward with just notification. So one of the questions that we have for you, and I know you've got, maybe before I jump into that, you do have your public information meeting that's developer-led, which is sort of taking place early in the process. And that would be something that you may wish to consider keeping, and kind of put the onus on the developer to have that consultation with the public. So there's really two questions here. One is council supportive of considering an amendment to the development procedure and fees bylaw to revise the public hearing requirements so that there would be no default requirement for a public hearing for zoning applications that conform to the OCP? And then maybe your thoughts at the same time about maintaining the public information meeting requirement for all zoning amendment applications. And I'd love to hear from you, and we'll have a second question on variances as well. So just I'll just end the show so that we could see you.
Okay. So, members of council, you have questions? And then we'll get to the...
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, go ahead. Go that way.
Oh, no, I'm just...
I missed you,
No.
starting first. No, you can go first. I thought I did, but I wasn't sure.
Sorry, my OCD thought we were going around in a circle.
Okay, well, next time I'll
Councillors,
change it around a bit more.
Well, pardon me. Thank you for your report. This was an amazing report. I'm really excited about this, and thorough, and all the recommendations, or most of them, I really support. Just a couple of quick ones. I really like the strengths. Stuff you said about our interdepartmental collaboration is exactly where we've been hoping to get to with our staff, and if the staff feels like that, then we are doing great. And the silo environment has ended, which you quoted, which we used to have, so now we don't, so that's great. There's a reminder, I really like the internal procedures. Council request for special projects is just a good reminder to council when we talk about staff capacity. Every time we load on another report, that is adding to their capacity, so that's a good reminder for us. Thank you. I like the external review option. We didn't really go over that too much, but that seems like a really good thing to look into. I agree with the public process for the DPs. I like the recommendation, or the concept that it gives the public a false sense that they can influence the DP approvals. I think we've been saying that for quite a while. So to remove that I would support that. I support also the removal of the requirement of the neighborhood public meetings, but I do have a question about removing the notice provisions. Was that just like the signs out front? Is that newspaper stuff? Just trying to get clarity on that. Because I would like the signs to remain in front of properties that are going to change, but I don't think the neighborhood meetings are necessary. just some stuff with the APC to focus on long-range planning and major applications instead of just all the things. I thought that was a really good idea. And the pre-applications are great meetings. I think that was a great concept and something to look into. And just a question, sorry, your question at the end about the, sorry, so the DPs are not really created equally, and for this question about the tracking and the transparency that we're talking about, just sort of a concern moving forward about the bigger developments and where they are compared to the smaller developments as far as transparency. And I'm not really, I'm not kind of describing this properly, but I'm just concerned with if transparency is key, but it's like they're not equal. So for a big crazy development that isn't necessarily doing the things the council wants, yeah, the transparency and such would be hopefully different than just your regular average Joe who's looking for a DP or something like that. So I just like to make sure there's a differential between those two things as far as the transparency for those developers. I'm not sure if that made sense, but that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, and I will say we have advocated at length for DCC eligible projects at UBCM every year that I've served a council, specifically even for fire departments, and we're several years unlucky, but we appreciate that suggestion, and maybe we'll try again. We already built the fire hall, so that's too late for that one, but for all the rest of the DCC changes, maybe we can get something happening there. So anyways, thank you very much for your report. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, Councillor Spruill.
I was guessing. Yeah, this is a really good document, and I think the people who have written this report have really looked into what the actual situation is here with our planning department. It's unfortunate because we've had people retiring. We haven't always had a consistent flow. Now we do. So that's good to be always aware of that for clarity of staff and for the developer. It's laid out in practical terms, so I really appreciate that. Twice it mentions in the report, though, that the reason for the province of BC doing all this is to help accelerate the construction of affordable housing. But I didn't see any more in the report on that. Is that the main focus? Is that really an important part of this whole report? The affordable housing piece?
Through the mayor, I mean, the intention of the province in funding this is that, the supply issue. And, they're thinking that if there's more supply, that will help with the demand. And the more supply theoretically should reduce prices. I think affordable housing is maybe a little bit more complex than that. But I mean, that's, I think, in the basic sense. And I think in many areas of the province, there's large affordable housing type projects that are hung up in slow approval processes, which is, the concerns around that has really driven this initiative. And, this funding was provided to high growth municipalities across the province. So I think the intention is to improve your processes so that it will free up additional housing and housing choice. But it does apply to, it will help all types of development in your community, just because the processes, whether it be commercial, industrial, or housing, are generally mirrored.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Thanks so much for this, Nancy. It's a really great report. It really describes the context that we find ourselves in, especially in the last short while, and the changes to the community, and so very informative. I mostly agree with the suggestions. I have a couple of questions around how this will, first of all, how will this work include or integrate with the upcoming OCP updates? And also the DCC review, and the new website, and whether or not the funding, so these are maybe staff questions, and I'm not sure you can help me with them. But just wondering about that integration, because I know the website RFP, I believe, is up right now, and we'd want to do this with that. I'm a little concerned about the exemption of ADUs, but I agree that they are onerous, and so I'm happy to look at that, but I would want to have some mechanism for incentivizing ADUs to be long-term rentals, and also potentially below market rentals, and if they were going to be fast-tracked. The street tree bylaw, I agree, the street trees the street trees up in Coal Valley Estates at least don't seem to be doing what they should do, I guess, what we were hoping they would do. So we definitely need to look at that, and how we get like proper shade producing, healthy, happy trees up there and everywhere else, and how we integrate that with the tree bylaw as well. Happy to see the pre-zoning, but as the report mentions, there is, I do have a concern around pre-zoning and then losing the ability to negotiate more value out of for the community. So looking at that, I also appreciated the comments on having a supportive council, and positive organizational culture, and we've come a long way in a short while on that organizational culture, and just ensuring that that staff and council are aligned on what our priorities are, and fully are understanding what that is, because then we're happier to delegate to staff. And I think that might be it. Yeah, so also wanting to look at how we integrate our climate concerns and incentivize things like electrification. So should we get an application for an ADU which is entirely electric and solar powered, we would want to prioritize that instead of one that's hooked up to fossil fuels in some way. Those types of things to just further integrate our what our OCP goals are into the actual groundwork of builds. So then I'll stop there, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you want to answer, Stania, your questions?
Yeah, on the just the integration of the different, how we're going to do that with the OCP and the VCMU one and stuff, and the DCCs.
So with the new website, that's maybe the simplest one is we are including information about this project and the aims of this project in the RFP for the website. So we'll just have to keep an eye on how best to integrate those two projects. I don't anticipate there would be a problem, but there would be an opportunity in trying to coordinate the timing of those two. With the DCC review, the calculation and timing of charging DCCs is so related to the development process, but they're not at odds with each other at all. So we'll just incorporate any new information from that DCC bylaw into this development process, and information that goes out, any new information that's created for developers. And in terms of the OCP update project, yes, so potentially if we are going to be making changes to development permit areas, that would be left for the OCP update project and not completed within this modernization project.
Thank you. Councillor Kettler?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, so I guess going back to what Councillor Sproul was talking about, you know, the province's intention, they did make big promises as to affordable housing market and non-market housing, like, you know, many units would be built across the province, and then sort of the realization, I guess, that, you know, that responsibility really falls onto municipalities and local governments to take on. And as we saw with, you know, the BC assessment, the development pressure is huge for these small communities. And we are one of those experiencing huge development pressure. And, you know, we've really taken what we've done, our system from when when I was first elected in 2014 to very, you know, paper-based, everything done, you know, front of the office, everybody coming in, to, you know, a much more online system already. We've taken huge steps, and you know, just an example that we're even live streaming this today is a huge step for the village. So we've come a long way already, and there's still a long way to go for improvement. And I'm very grateful to staff. Kudos to you for getting this money. It's a lot of money, and it's much needed. So that's wonderful that we have now the funds to make these very important changes for us. And I think being really clear about what we expect of developers is really important, and is really the focus of what we're doing with this. Like, so the public and development community know what to expect from us, and can have some confidence in what we do, so they can have, you know, some confidence in what they do with their finances and all of that. So that's great. I do have a question around the external review, because there is so much development pressure and we do have limited planning staff. I do think we will need to use a third party in some instances. I'm wondering if we have something come back like Trilogy, can we get that developer to pay for this third party themselves, because it is their development that person would be working on solely. So is that something where we can sort of recover cost in that way?
Through the chair, it certainly would be the way that we would recommend setting it up, is that the third party consultant would be retained by the village, so that you're in control, you're the client, they're doing work on your behalf. However, the costs would be charged back to the applicant. So they would generally, what we would recommend is that they would put up a retainer for a certain amount of money, so that you're not, you know, invoicing them every month and trying to collect, so that you have a fund, and then that would pay for the third party review.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, that's important. I also support using third party paid for by the village for affordable housing fast tracking. We don't have many projects coming forward that are affordable housing, so you know, that's kind of few and far between. But if we did, I would support getting the extra help to fast track those as soon as we can. I have a similar feeling as the other councillors about the pre-zoning, is that, and I heard this from other municipalities at ABICC, that there is a concern about losing the ability to negotiate with developers on zoning for community amenities, which of course are very important to us. So yeah, I would want to look further into, especially as you said, the fact that we can't use DCCs for many of those amenities that we would now want to use them for, because that is so narrow right now. I wouldn't want to take away the negotiating power that we have now through zoning. And then in regard to your last slide, your question on the public hearing, if everything aligns, I think with OCP, yeah, and I feel that, yeah, we don't need that extra step. However, I do agree with when there's zoning changes that should be on the developer to continue to hold those local neighborhood meetings. So there's my answer to that. Thanks.
Thank you. That very, very good report. I'm going to speak first. There's a couple of things that I highlighted, and one was on page 71, and it's a lack of consistency of requirements between adjacent local governments. Could you explain a little bit about that? Is that coming from the development community?
Yes, Mayor, that is coming from the development community, and there's somewhat of a lobby, I think, across the province. And these are developers, like, for example, I think the Comox Valley is a great example where you've got, 3-4 jurisdictions in very, tight quarters with the same consultants, many of the same developers working in each of the communities. But it's like they have to learn, new regulations, new bylaws, new processes for each of the communities that, are very close. So what they're saying is that if the rules and regulations were more standardized across the province, it would be helpful to them. So I think in a way they're lobbying the province and, how could we, standardize, but at the same time, there's very clear jurisdiction within each municipality to set their own regulations, but it's something to be cognizant of, I guess, as you're moving forward, and maybe opportunities to partner and align with other municipalities in the area.
Thank you. I've always been opposed to that because I think that we build the community that we want, and if we wanted to live in another area, we would go there and live. I think we're very unique in some forms, and I'd like to keep that, and that's part of what we request from developers. Next is third-party trilogy, third-party. They actually did that in the past. We used that process. They paid for a lot of the requirements that were needed, and they gave the money to the village, and the village was in control. So that was a positive. Pre-zoning, I totally do not support pre-zoning. We also got into a situation with that, and we're still dealing with that. And I think it's the wrong way to go. The other one, was there any discussion about the step code?
I don't think, maybe in sort of a general sense, it's come up as just another layer of costs, but I think most builders are finding that they're meeting step 3, just based on sort of conforming with the existing code. But I think there's trepidation moving forward into step 4 and 5 as, increasing costs.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, this is interesting because the provincial government is concerned about us holding up development. We have actually approved 4 buildings on the main street. 1 is in process, the other 3 are sitting there. And it's not from anything that the village has done. I figure it's because of the lack of workers and the cost of materials that they're holding off in developing it. And so that's an interesting perspective. Okay, and thank you very much for the report. Other than the things that I've mentioned, I totally support the report, and I think it's really well done. So thank you very much. And thank you for the staff and for council for giving your input. Very important. And it's nice to see you all working together, and I was really happy to see the crossing between managers and the discussions that go on for development. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Brown?
Sorry, I just forgot a couple of things. One is the, similar to Councillor Sullivan, I think removing the requirement for a neighborhood meeting or a public information session is fine, but I would like the public to have access to information should they choose to look for it. So having a sign that alerts people on the property or whatever, I think is valuable. And then I just wanted to put in a plug for accessibility as well. When we're doing the multiple brochures for our development community, we have, I believe the Accessibility Committee has developed a brochure. And if we can include that in that, that would be great, because that is also one of our priorities. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes,
Your Worship, I think Nancy did have one more question, if there's time.
okay, yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, just the second question is in around the delegation of variances, and if council is supportive of delegating minor variances to staff, and it would be up to the municipality to define what minor is and your comfort level with that. But just to help us go to phase 2 of the project, just some indication on council's comfort level of delegating variances would also be appreciated. And I mean, while you're talking about delegation, many municipalities are delegating DPs as well, technical DPs like environmental DPs, for example, or wildfire, as well as more minor form and character development permit applications as well. So just wouldn't mind your thoughts on delegation.
Courtney, could you explain what a minor is?
I'll take a stab at that, Mayor Baird, is that it's really up to the municipality to define. But generally, I would say it would be things that are sort of inconsequential. Maybe in terms of setbacks, it might be like a percentage, like setback variances that are, a 10% reduction. Same with height. You might have situations like Courtney and I have talked about in the older homes where you've got existing non-conforming situations and they want to raise the foundation and build another story underneath of exactly the same size, but that does require a variance. Maybe those would be delegated to staff because you have a track record of approving them. Or potentially, like until you amend your zoning bylaw, right now if there's a 90-meter provision for secondary suites, for example, and they're seeing a lot of variances, until that's amended, you could potentially delegate that to staff. That's what we're seeing. I mean, this is new legislation, and there's only a few municipalities that have created definitions of minor, but there's certainly more coming as time goes on, and I think quite a few in the next few months.
I just think of the amount of work that goes into those from staff for a minor. It's a tremendous amount of work to do the reports to present to council. So, Councillor Kettler?
Yeah, I definitely think it's worth discussing with staff and seeing, just as was said, sort of taking a look back at the history of some of the variances that we have permitted and seem to go through routinely, I guess, and make sense in terms of the definition of minor. So, yeah.
Councillor Brown?
That's a good conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm willing to have that discussion as well. I think for an existing non-conforming would be fine, but for other things, maybe not. But I also, forgot another question, which was, did we get input from the APC on this? And I understand that they were not part of the consultation process. And they're specifically mentioned in the report, so I'm hoping we can refer this to the APC or get their input somehow.
Okay, Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown, thank you very much. Councillor Sproul.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this, and I really do think I'd like to hear more from our staff. I mean, it's all here before us. We've had that conversation about ADUs ever since we allowed them, as to whether to just move them through with the bunch of policies all written out, or whether we should have more to say in them. So that's a big one to discuss. I mean, most of them are very straightforward, but then we have some ADUs from hell that are proposed, and we might not we need to discuss whether in those kind of cases we.
Yes. Councillor Sullivan.
Not too aware of the hellish ADUs, but there's been some challenges. Yeah, our track record is definitely for approving the ADUs. So going through the records and stuff about things that we always approve makes sense, and anything to streamline things that make sense, I support.
Okay. Do you want that in a motion, or is that okay?
Mayor Baird, I think that's this verbal direction is just helpful for moving forward to the next step. So I do appreciate that. If council wishes to make a motion, that's good too.
Yeah, I think this being a committee of the whole, this is general feedback, and now staff have the information council's given some clarity on what's worth pursuing further.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have question period. We have one person in the audience. Yes, would you like to speak?
In the form of a question?
Yes, please. And to the agenda.
Oh, of course.
You can come up to the mic if you like.
I don't need to unless that's how you do
Well,
it.
people at home can hear you otherwise.
Nancy might not be able to hear you if it's.
Is this the general questions or it's not on this file, it's on the previous item?
Well, this is question period.
Okay,
Yes,
but not to that person.
It doesn't need to be to that person.
no.
But because it's being
Live streamed.
the audience will hear your question.
Okay. I have a question that could lead to a very, very short three-part comment phrased as a question that would be shorter than me coming back as a delegation.
Okay.
Just going to frame it up that way. Is it the intention of council to refer the interim recreation, arts and culture process update for community feedback before the process continues? And is there consideration around engagement with the Heritage Commission related to the Heritage Management Plan, which is a guiding document, and the Economic Development Committee, which identified arts and culture and its strategic priorities, again, for feedback before this process continues? And I'm interested in the answer to that. And I have 3 subsequent comments that can be framed as questions, very briefly, if you're willing to receive them.
Okay. Kevin, do you have an answer for her question?
Yes, we have plans for further engagement. I think the specifics of that haven't been determined. And in previous reports to council, we have indicated there would be a role for the Economic Development Committee. That committee was dormant at that time. I believe they have since met, and the plan would be to bring something to them. There is not a specific plan in place at this time for a date or at what point. I think it's likely that we'll now proceed in starting to flesh out some of the more detailed components now that we've done a significant amount of engagement, and then bring back some of that, to council and to others once there's more information on the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
I have no doubt there's further consultation, and you've been great and fully committed to that. I'm referring to consultation on the report that's just been presented by the consultants, and whether that's an adequate starting place to continue the process. Will that be circulated for feedback for those who have been involved?
It's been posted online now. But there is not any specific engagement beyond what has already been done, but for this phase. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. May I ask subsequent questions, comments, phrases?
You're allowed 3.
There are 3. That's what I had. I've been very, very focused
Wait,
about
including
this.
the first one or the 3?
No, first one was a process question. First one was a process question. The second one is a question that I am wondering if council has considered the important role that you play in striking a balance between interests in the community, i.e. council holds space between the private sector and the good of the people. That's the role you play. And another way is that council holds space to ensure that the broadest, breadth of community services are available to the community for the well-being of community, not just in response to, for example, the loudest contributing voice in a survey. And especially on the heels of a recreation focus in the promotion of this community that has had consequence into what the the population base is right now. So I guess that is a rhetorical question. The second question is that under the foundational themes, I hope that council perhaps consider the need to update language related to justice, equity, and intersectionalism when we're talking about what the foundation of art and culture planning and programming should look like. Could council consider why there's a clear absence of language related to heritage and heritage conservation anywhere in the notes or the input of that report? And why representative organizations that are regional and out of area have such a dominant voice in that report? Things to just consider, could you? That's why I'm making it a question. And third is, would council still consider the potential of having a arts and culture working group, if not part of the Economic Development Committee, which was the original place that those folks were, would council consider the value in that, given the really important process that we're engaged in and the really important place that art and culture and heritage play in our community, which I have concerns right now are absent from the update document? Question mark.
Are you recommending that we separate them?
Not necessarily. All we had at economic development was there's an arts and culture process happening. And that was the extent of the input or the information that we got. So we have an organization, or not an organization, serving at your pleasure, that identified this as a strategic priority, but there's been no mechanism for input from community members who've stepped up and offered to lead in beyond our own individual interests, but truly to be there as a voice and offer that voice. So I just feel like there's been something missing here. That comes from your direction, council. I appreciate Kevin's been wonderful and consultative, and I appreciate the input opportunities that we've had, but as an overall process, I'm putting this back to council. This isn't a critique of your staff. It's thinking about where this process fits into other processes and how to make it rigorous and effective and positive for our community.
Okay, we'll go around the table as you're asking council.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
who would like to start? Okay, go ahead. Councillor Kettler? Go ahead. You both put your hands up at the same time, so go for it.
Go ahead, you start at the head. No.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say when I was trying to suss out a vision, but pulling all those pieces together. Heritage and economic development and our transportation, where parking is, our active transportation, all of those things that kind of we need a more clear vision. Holistic vision of all those things. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I think, what was presented today, we are looking for, she flat out, and he asked for, where are those gaps? Do you see those gaps? And so that's perfect feedback, right? So, we're missing heritage. We're missing, I think, a more arts-focused report. And the committee, the Arts and Culture Committee, was brought up within that report, and the idea of having one. And I support that, and so that's something I think that we could work on further. And yeah, I think there's definitely room for improvement there, and I don't see why we wouldn't want to refer this to those very intelligent volunteers that are working for us, working for a better community. Yeah. Thanks.
Councillor Brown?
Thanks for the questions, and thanks for taking the time to go through a very dense document today. I agree. As I mentioned, I think the survey was very recreation focused, and also not just that it was recreation focused, but in order to tease out arts and culture, the questions need to be I think it's challenging to do that in a survey. We only did get 200 plus 267 or something results for our vacation rental. We had over 400 survey respondents, so I think that also speaks to the quality of this, or the experience of the survey. And also just the dominance of recreation in our community, which is not a negative thing, but it is a fact. And so in order to encourage arts and culture people, we might need a different approach. And so I really like the idea of obviously the Economic Development Steering Committee, I think would be a great group to have a look at this. But also actually collecting an arts and culture group. So not the Cumberland Culture and Arts Society, because I know they were involved or participated, but actually collecting people who do arts and culture in the community for that feedback, I think would be, like, whether it's a workshop or a whatever, would be also very valuable, because I think you're right. We are responsible for framing that that conversation, and I think we could do more to get that piece out, the arts and culture heritage piece.
Councillor Brown, thank you very much. Councillor Spruill.
Well, the two councillors have highlighted where we could make improvements to the plans. I look at these as being not quite superficial, I don't mean that, but there is a lot more depth to go in all these aspects. And yeah, I'm surprised I didn't notice that heritage isn't widely mentioned in the report, in the things. But I think it's just a beginning. I think that there's lots for us to consider, and the makeup of the groups that could give more information. So I see this as a good starting point.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thanks. Thanks, Megan, for your question. I think that during our discussion of this report, definitely most of council felt the recreation heavy, like Councillor Brown has mentioned. And yes, thanks. The gap in the heritage was obviously glaring. And also I really like Councillor Kettler really has a good point with just all these things are happening at once. I mean, they're all interconnected in a way that actually is all at the same time. It's kind of like this entire community needs to replace and fix everything and do everything. And we've got some of the plans, and we're working on some of the other plans. Moving forward, I think I'm not the last report kind of goes against forming another committee, so that's kind of ironic. But no, absolutely. So I would be more interested in something like that. But and I agree with referring it all to the committees that we do have. That can be an important step as well. And our council is always supporting. We're trying to support arts and culture as much as we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for your opinions. I think this is the first step in the process, and I know we're just about finished. This is the first phase of the project, and it's good to find out where we're failing, and we need to address that. So absolutely, we'll move forward with the information that we've been given. Okay? And yes, I'm going to do that question period. Any member that would like to ask questions, email info@cumberland.ca using subject line question period.
We do have a couple of questions sent in earlier today. The first is regarding the Recreation, Arts and Culture Plan, and the question is, does staff realize that the village square is a contaminated site and cannot have buildings placed on it with footings?
Yes, I'm very well aware. That's how we got the property in the first place. Didn't cost us a dime, and we know we're not allowed to build a building on it. That's why it's a park. Apparently you can do that. Yeah.
And this next question, two questions are related to the Development Modernization Project. Why would the size of a building be considered minor and not need public input? And I believe this may relate to the delegation of certain applications to staff.
Yeah, I think the best response I can have to that would be that we would set out the criteria of what minor is, and council would need to be comfortable with that. definition first. So that's the homework that staff would then do to bring back.
The report will come back clarifying what a minor is before council approves.
Before council would determine to delegate
Yes.
anything that you currently have authority, you would have to feel comfortable that the criteria was clear and was fit within the definition of minor, if that's the direction you wanted to proceed. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and one more. How does the process of streamlining development include citizens at an early stage when not consulted for this report?
Is there a process for it to go other than what was presented tonight? You have to have something to go to the public with. Now, is that report going out to the public for comment?
I don't believe so. I'd have to check with Courtney. I think the focus of this project is largely internal process, as opposed to seeking, feedback from the public on how to do administrative process. And in doing so, there will be a number of things, some of the regulatory changes and whatnot that may have some public process. But the intention of the report today was a check-in with council. Here's what we've heard so far. And then if there is more significant public process required because there's potentially more consequential changes, then I think that would be expected later on in the process. But it's largely an administrative, how can we find efficiencies under the existing kind of internal way of doing business.
If anybody has any questions about certain parts of the report, they can always contact staff or members of council to get clarification. Yes?
And we also talked about referring it to the APC, which is a public committee.
Yeah.
So that would also serve that function.
Yeah, and I would say that some of the more specifics might be the time to go to the APC. If there were proposals to change bylaws or significant ways of doing things, variances, development approvals, development permit approvals, the items like that. Yeah.
Okay?
Helping us define what minor is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Some of them are very minor, some of the ones that have come to council in the past. Okay, so
Raising your house 6 inches.
if it's within the, yeah. So can we have a recommendation, please? Closed portion?
That council close the meeting to the public pursuant to Section 90 of the Community Charter to consider law enforcement if the council considers that disclosure would reasonably be expected to harm the conduct of the investigation under or enforcement of an enactment, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn.